Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor, Thomas Goss, and welcome to the first live event, big public live event of 2023. I actually had a live evaluation session on Patreon a week or two ago, but this is the first public live session. So yeah, I'd like to do these more often, talk to people, just connect through the chat and answer questions if I can. And those questions actually really help me come up with great ideas for things to put in the upcoming book. Well, this particular event um, is a live Q&A, and it's also going to be announcements of things I'm going to be doing this year. And I cannot fit everything I'm going to be doing this year into this particular event because there are just a ton of things. And there's some things I'm actually not allowed to talk about. I'm taking on a couple of um, kind of hush hush projects I can't announce yet. So uh, anyway, with all that said, I will announce one thing like right off the bat to share with you right now. If you have not yet picked up a copy of 100 orchestration tips or 100 more orchestration tips, I just dropped the price another few dollars. So it was $28 for the sale for my, which I'll talk about in a second. For the research sale, I've dropped it down to another $3 to $25 per copy, or 48 for the bundle. So if anybody's been waiting to the last day, maybe this will help you out. And helping you guys out is really the name of the game. And you have helped me so much. Um, I started this channel and I started Patreon and I started selling the books. And so on and so forth. And you guys have just really shown me a lot of support and not just like financial support through helping it make it possible for me to set aside the time to do, the educational arm of my career, but also just being there as colleagues, as friends, and keeping my community on the right track and keeping things collegial. The occasional there's the occasional beginnings of a food fight now, but people pull it back in and they're really respectful for the most part, and I'm so thankful for that, because it's like, I've made the analogy before. It's kind of like my living room. It's like my digital living room, and I'm throwing this huge party all the time that's all about orchestration, and people come and go, and people share things, and sometimes they share things and they don't get a lot of attention. That's really a shame. Sometimes I have the time to set aside to look at it, and other times I'm working on content for you, so I don't have time to make too much of a comment. But people jump in, people give advice, and it seems to me the more people sort of follow the suggestions that I have put forward, at least for Facebook, the more attention, the more advice they get back. So if if you're sharing all 5 movements of your magnum opus and you want an opinion, you probably will get crickets. But if you share a page and you say, listen, I'm having problems with this piece, and I'm not sure if the clarinets and the oboes work together and so on, you'll get your answer probably much, and in a lot more detail, a lot more, a lot more engagement. So yeah. So anyways, just to flash the screen again, if you just joined us, the sale has been dropped a few bucks. I hope that helps anybody that needs it, and or just catching up with the sale. So what's happening right now is a research sale to help me cover some of the costs that I'm going to definitely incur this year in writing my next book, 100 Last Orchestration Tips, and also some courses that I'm going to be announcing over the next couple hours. So what's going to happen is I'm going to have pretty much make an announcement and then do some Q&A, and then make another, like about every half hour, make another announcement. Okay. So there are some very juicy courses coming up that I'll be announcing and talking about, and I'll answer your questions on those too. And I'll read a tip from the new book. Let me talk a little bit about 100 last orchestration tips. So, um, the thing about it is that it is not the last tips that I will ever write, nor the last tips that I will ever put in a book. It's just the last tips that are going to be formatted in the same way as 100 orchestration tips, right? So, being like a standalone volume of 100 tips, and having having the 100 the 20 questions at the end, and so on and so forth. So when I return to the whole tip kind of publishing, it'll be probably in a different format, and I'm playing with 3 or 4 different ideas about how that could be. Um, but yeah, but it's the one of the problems that I'm facing is that if I just keep publishing books of 100 tips, endlessly, um, I'm worried that a lot of them won't get read. Like they might get purchased, but they might not get read. And I'm noticing like some people who I have actually been fairly close to, and have like got the book, and then they've come up with a question that was answered in the book, like right after the book was sold. I'm thinking more 100 more orchestration tips, and that's like no criticism on anybody. It's just an observation of the reality of the situation, that it takes time to look through the book, takes time to check things out, and I just have to think this out. I have to nut this out. All right. So to put it in a Kiwi term. So yeah. So I'm about to embark on this. I would say, except for the fact that I've already written 40 tips, and I'm really excited about it. Yeah, I was looking through my rough draft. I haven't even numbered them yet. Um, so and put the book into any kind of formal shape, but I was going over the manuscript, and I was giving everything headers as you can in Mac Pages, and so that I could see where all the chapters were. It's really getting huge. It's turning into a big book. So I don't know when it's going to be released. Um probably maybe early next year, and possibly later this year if I get into a role. I don't know. Just don't know what my free time is going to be like, or I have no free time. Let's face it. What the time what the time windows are going to do over the next few months. Now, one little side announcement is that I'm going to be in LA uh, at the end of September, beginning of October, and there are going to be, actually, end of September, and I would love to do another composer hang. Last time, uh, my friend Charles had, we had, geez, about 30 people over, and we had this big circle of composers. And I said, please, in 25 words or less, describe what you're working on right now. And it took like 2 hours because everybody wanted to take 5 to 10 minutes to describe what they were doing. So we didn't really get a chance to back and forth or anything. So we might do a different format if we do this again, but I would love to do another composer hang. And this time, like anybody around Studio City, Sherman Oaks, because that's where I'll be staying with my older stepdaughter, who is works in the industry. So anyway, I mean, you guys should have her come by and and talk about what she does someday, which I'll share if she gives me permission. But yeah, she may have already worked with you, and you might not realize it. But all right. So I want you guys to start hitting me with your orchestration questions, okay? And I'm looking in the feed right now, and I'm seeing so many people who participated in the orchestration challenge, who are supporters on Patreon, and I've got you here. So I just want to say, really, thanks you, thanks so much for helping me out last year, for helping me out this year, some of you, and for being a part of that orchestration challenge. You know, it was such a challenge for me too, in the way that I organized my time. So this year I've got a different strategy, which will be maybe kind of a no backsies kind of a strategy. So like, you give me your piece, and I may, by the time you get back to me and you say, oh geez, Thomas, I want to change all this stuff, I might say, well, I've already evaluated it, you know. So yeah. So I might have to just tell everybody to really, really get their stuff in order, and I'll have a checklist of things to go through this year. All right. So one last little bit of chat before I get to the Q&A. I was just asked by Jason Lafredo, did I have a good vacation? And I did. And I feel healthier and less stressed than I was last year this time. And I hope I look healthier. I'm feeling a lot healthier. And I did some hiking, I did some biking, all of this planned like a year in advance, getting the absolute cheapest, starving musician kind of rate on everything. I did splurge a little here and there when I could, but just going out there with my wife and son and doing a bike trip. There's some great hiking to be done. So there's some communities that actually own and run trails into the backcountry, and we went on one of those, and it was just amazing. And just really kind of being able to kind of shut everything out and just go and just walk around and think about things. That was fantastic. So thanks for asking that, Jason. So I finished. I just before we went on the trip, I finished the last of the orchestration challenge evaluations. I don't want to do that again. I think that this time they're going to be finished a lot earlier because of the new strategy I'm going to be taking on. So that the second half of the year, the end of the year, won't be so cramped. But who might it? I don't know. I might get one of my clients saying, Thomas, I need you to orchestrate another anime film or something. So I don't know. If you're out there, Dimitri, I'm ready. Just give me a call. I'd love to work with you again. All right. All right. So let's get to the Q&A. All right. And just to say hi to everybody. Hi, Peter. Hi, Michael. Hi, Arne. Hi, Gabi. Hello, PDQ Bach fan channel. Hello, Morpheus. Hello from New Zealand. Thanks for your kind comments about the channel. All right. So, all right. So I'm not seeing too many questions yet, but there's a few good ones. All right. So Carlo from New York asks if I'm still evaluating the MOOC. Okay, I've not yet submitted any assignments, so I'm doing all that on Patreon. Okay, so the evaluations, anyways. So I mean, anybody can take the MOOC and study it on their own, or I'm hoping that, like, if you're a composition teacher, that you might, if my resources are something you can build a course around, please use that. Do not think that it's exclusive to me. All right. I'm actually hoping that it could be like almost like a curriculum or a book or something like that. Maybe I should make a book out of it. But anyways, the, just, 8 assignments talking, that each address a different aspect of the instruments that they work with. And people are going to probably ask, are you going to do more MOOC things? I say, yeah, let me get through 2023. I really want to revisit it. And I had plans for MOOC Term 2, which involved working with some live musicians. And that was just impossible. It got blown out of the water for the past 3 years because of COVID. And the course that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to announce in about 20 minutes, same Same deal. Okay. So, the people have been waiting on things. I get emails like, when are you going to do, the next part of this, the next part of that. So anyways, so to get back to your question, Carlo, yeah. So, I mean, if you're on Patreon, if you're a supporter, yes, I will evaluate your MOOC assignment. Right. So yeah, and you can work with any orchestration teacher or composition teacher with that who will take it on too. It doesn't have to be me. If there's a cheaper option or you'd rather work with somebody else, it's all fine. Um, Adrian asks, have I considered someday a cross volume index? If things happen the way that I think that you won't need one. Well, I mean, you might need one in the new version, but yeah, but you wouldn't need to go back and forth between files. I'll say. All right. Hi, Blasco or Blasku. All right. All right. I just can't keep up with the hellos. All right. Would I change anything in my orchestration of Barvinsky after going through all the entries? And Michael asked us about the FIA previous time. Yeah. You know, I would probably just try to be a better, just try to not be so forgetful. That's one of the things that I'm noticing is just, um, the me of 15 years ago probably didn't work as smart as I do today in terms of being organized, having good workflows, good approaches, working with my own timing and my own energy levels. But the me of today is also like can forget things more than the me of 15 years ago. So this year's big forgetful thing was like using using the file I hadn't updated yet. I don't know why I used the older file, and that was something that I even used on my own. So there are like one or two notes that I think are a little dodgy in there as a result. So I mean that is one thing, of course, I would try to fix. And then I think that I feel that orchestration is really me, and it's me responding to Barvinsky in a way that I feel that he would have liked or he would have resonated with. So, yeah, let me think about that one. If it pops into my head over the next couple hours, I'll let you know, Michael. Okay. Oh, Roque says titanic effort on the challenge. Yeah, it was a big effort. Wow. I think it's just because it was longer. You know what I mean? Like we've had some we've had like we seem to be going longer with our excerpts. This year is going to be no different, but next year it's going to be a little shorter. So, if I'm doing the MOOC simultaneously, but that MOOCs are just huge efforts. And I'm next time I do the MOOC, I'm not going to have like course updates in the lesson. I'll just have that separate as a separate video or just like just use text or something like that. Text announcement. Okay. Would I consider analyzing German or German-like scores, symphonic poems by Strauss, Karlovitz, Szymanowski, or anyone sounding like that? Yeah, I mean, down the road, yeah. I mean, there are a series of courses. All right, so this is something else I should probably announce. Okay, um, and that is that this year's videos are going to be short and sweet. Okay, just because of the effort that I'm going to be putting into the book and to some of these courses, but they're all going to be things relevant to the releases, hopefully, or some of them will be. Some of them will be just things that I'm interested in. I want to do. Like they're going to be more film score evaluations. It's funny. They thought that the film score evaluations would be a huge hit, but it turns out that a lot of people are doing that now. So I guess what I'm offering isn't all that unique. But I mean, I hope that the insights are useful. So yeah, but I mean, I'm not doing it to get the views. I mean, if I were doing things to get views, and I would be running this as a very hard edged kind of a person, and I would be taking advantage of every second of the day to get bigger followings on social media and stuff like that. And I don't have time for that. I'm a composer. I've got I'm already late to do something else. You know what I mean? I don't have time to handle that. and I can't afford to pay somebody to go out and promote me on social media and to be constantly manipulating things and advising me on what I should do next if I want to get more and more views and hits. So, I mean, as a result, my views have probably dipped over the past, on new videos have probably dipped over the past few years. Um, but I don't care. I mean, it's what I care is about the community being whole and being moving forward with their training and everybody working together and sharing resources, and that seems to be strong. So as long as that's strong, I don't care so much about titanic amounts of views and stuff. All right, so I missed a couple up here. Adrian asked, how fast and far can a flute play a chromatic run? um I mean, they could just go any direction as fast as you like, probably. I mean, they can also jump from like the bottom to the top, and but I mean, I'm not saying to score that way all the time unless you're working with a player. I mean, I scored some of that as an example of things that are really difficult. Then I had one of the greatest flute players in the world come into my studio, Bridget Douglas, and she played it like it was nothing. And so like I had to sort of think, well, and then I asked her about it afterwards, and she said, oh yeah, like if this were somebody working, say, maybe in a like a regional orchestra or semi-pro or something like that, probably would be really, really difficult to do. Probably would take a huge amount of woodshedding, some of the things I asked her. But as far as your question is, how far and fast can a flute play a chromatic run? It's just, they have amazing, you're just gonna have to do some score reading. I would just say like about as fast as you would want something to intelligibly sound. But like, yeah, I wouldn't worry about that too much. I'd say just write it, and but I mean, don't be like, if something would just be impossible on any instrument, then don't score that. Okay, PDQ Bach fan channel, really quickly. I've answered this in other things, so I'm just going to touch on it really quickly. Why does everyone criticize Schumann's orchestration? Okay, all right. So it's two different reasons. Okay, one is the growth of the orchestra. The orchestra of the time of Schumann was a different beast than it is today. So if you listen to Schumann played by the orchestra of the Romantic and Revolutionnaire, apologies to my French speaking audience, um, then it makes more sense. I'm not saying that it's great orchestration, but it makes more sense. Okay. Then the other thing is that Schumann, Brahms, Mendelssohn, and so on, they were interested in the extension of Beethoven's concept of the symphony, of symphonic scoring, as being people who work out intellectual ideas and problems together and come to an emotionally satisfying but intellectual conclusion. Right? So that is not the orchestration of Tchaikovsky through, Berlioz through Tchaikovsky and, through to Ravel and so on. All right. So that is the main reason why I feel that Schumann's orchestration comes off poorly, or the main reasons, right? Is, one is like played on modern instruments exactly the way that it's scored, sounds a bit clunky. And people have other adjectives that they might want to use. And then just like in terms like comparing it to Berlioz of the same period, who was a was obviously a master orchestrator, from age 18 or 20 or something. Yeah, I mean, it's a different, the thinking of the orchestral textures and, as being their own thing. That was not something that was the huge obsession of those composers that followed that path. Okay. So, what's interesting is to look at Bruckner, because Bruckner, Mahler, and so on, because you see the two schools of thought combining the, just the masterful orchestration plus the intellectual working out kind of ideas. So yeah, so that would be my short answer. All right, so I better not go into it too much because I don't want to run out of time. But that's what I would say. PDQ Bach channel. All right, so let me just not lose track of where I am here. Okay, all right. Thanks, you guys. I mean, talking about how you like the channel and the content and everything. Thank you. I need that. Thank you. All right. All right. Question was writing for analog synthesizer plus classical instrumentation right now. Orchestra, string quartet, pipe organ. Asks Adrian Holmes. Any tips on arranging or scoring would be great. Not in 100 orchestration tips or 100 MOT. All right. Look. Um, my advice is this: if you're going to work with um, concert music on the one side and electronic music on the other, what you got to do is you have to find sounds that either complement the concert instruments, right? That have some kind of resonance with them, so that they work together well. And and then the other one is the contrast, right? They just having working with synthesizers, because I've done this. Okay, I've orchestrated tons of music that included keyboards, synthesizers, and so on. Sometimes um, I would emulate what the synthesizers were doing, and I would sort of just move it up to huge proportions, knowing that when my orchestration was played along with the band that had commissioned it, that they would that like they would be playing their keyboards, and it would just sound like it would just sound like they were expanded hugely. All right. Um, and then the contrast, of course, is sounds that only the synthesizer can make. Right. The trick is this: try not to do anything with the synthesizer that will blot out what the orchestra is doing. Otherwise, you might as well just not even orchestrate that part that can't be heard. Okay. So that's the really big concern for me, making sure that the texture works across um, everything. Okay. Okay. Somebody asked, explain all the different levels. Has never have been clear. Does one level give more privileges in terms of the review of the annual challenge? Yeah. Um, so um, that is usually that information is in each announcement. So I'm sorry if that hasn't been as clear to you, Peter. But yeah, it's just it's I'll have like section A will be for for the basic level, the minimum level, and then section B for semi brev, and section C for the dotted semi brev, and then moving up to brev is up to section D, and so on. And then as far as like the different levels of Patreon, just like that is all in the last, like the credits of each of my videos explains like all of the benefits and so on. And when you become a patron, you can look at, there's a pinned post that I think it's called Patreon supporter benefits or something like that, a portal, right? And it basically, clicking on it, you just see like everything that's available at the different levels, and then you can click further from there to your own page and like see what is available to you and so on. And then also in that portal, I have everything listed, all the courses that anybody can, any supporter of any level can access, and so on. All righty. Somebody, Barry Sachs guy asks, do you arrange/write music just for orchestra, or do you also arrange for other ensembles like brass quintet, wind ensemble, etc.? I am a full service composer, and I do it all. So everything from solo piano to little miniatures for piano and solo instrument, or just I've done some unaccompanied flute. I just and I've done brass quintet. I actually created a school's outreach program where members of the orchestra to whom I'm the I'm the education composer in residence. It was a brass quintet plus two percussionists who just basically brought the kitchen sink. They had some mallet instruments and some timpani and and drums and cymbals and so on. And then I just scored a bunch of different styles for them, some adaptations, some arrangements, and so on. It was really great to have the percussion there because they could really add something beautiful to it. And I had vibes, and yeah, it was just a really fun thing. We did like everything from like Taylor Swift to like Take Five was another thing that we did, and yeah, just a bunch of a bunch of different things. So I've done pretty much any kind of any kind of combination you could imagine that they could commission me to do is what I do. So and in fact I love scoring chamber music. One of my favorite things that's just still unperformed. Here's a ground level thing for anybody out there on tuba and bassoon. Just get in touch with me. I wrote a trio called The Deep End for Zach Spellman and Rufus Olivier of San Francisco Opera Orchestra. They have a trio called the Oreo Trio, Aurio. Okay, not Oreo cookie. Okay, all right. So anyway, it was Rufus and Rufus on bassoon. He's just an amazing bassoonist, like world class. And same thing with Zach on tuba. And then they had a pianist working with them. So I wrote this really kind of funky. It has like some Robert Fripp licks in it, and it has some funk licks in it, and it has some new age stuff in it just for fun. And so I wrote it for them, and they just I think they performed it once or twice, but it's out there. It's never been recorded or shared on YouTube or something. It's called The Deep End. So enterprising tuba bassoonist. So I just put in a plug for that work. So that would be an example. I would happily link whatever attempts were made on it. Okay. All right. Simon asks, remember Simon Alami asks, I reckon having heard you say the best key signatures for string writing is between 3 flats and sharps as 4 sharps, but I don't remember the reasoning behind it. It has to do with tuning in fifths. It really has to do with like open strings and like the relationship of the the accidentals to the open string. So for instance, like in 3 flats, you get C minor, right? Or E flat, right? Which has got the open G, just the sort of relationship to that and so on. With 4 sharps, F major, C sharp minor, you have the open E and so on. And, F, G, D minor, those are keys that show up in symphonies a lot. I will say one thing, having talked to numerous film composers about this, and especially film composers who mentored other younger film composers or developing film composers, one thing that they said is like, don't put your work into 6 flats or 7 sharps or something like that. Just keep it in the easier keys, because people are coming in, they have never seen your piece before, they're sitting down, they're going to play it, and they might get it on the first take if you don't put it into 6 flats, right? If you want it just to be recorded right off the bat and then everybody move on to the next thing and not waste time, try to make it easier for the sight reading players. All right. Alex asked, that means the tips will become an online resource. They actually are an online resource for universities. One university tried it out for a year. I haven't heard back from them for a renewal. Maybe they're still using it. So yeah, it's available. Like, that's more of a university thing though. But I mean, there already are a bunch of available tips online. So I'm not going to elaborate too much more. Apology if this is controversial. Maybe I should read it all the way through before I read it out. But for your orchestration challenges, you seem to be picking pianists who are the same nationality as the composer. Is that not a bit racist? Okay. All right. Just slow down there, Ryan. Okay. So in the first place, the last composer was Ukrainian and the performer was Ukrainian. Okay. But before that, Peter Bradley Fulgoni is not Spanish. Okay. Sofia Oruvieva, who played so Peter Bradley Fulgoni played the Faya. Sofia Oruvieva is Russian, not French, and she played the Boulanger on request. So, and I'm trying to remember, Yeah, I'm trying to remember a situation where the nationality of the pianist actually matched the player. It has nothing to do with it, Ryan. Okay, so it's just it's just it's only, the reason why a Ukrainian pianist played a Ukrainian work last time was because she was putting it out there on Facebook, and I heard it. First, I actually heard her play a different composer, and I was just enchanted with that. And I thought, wow, that would be something that, a way that I could, um, you know, connect a lot of things and help some people, help even more people than I usually do. And then I heard the Barvinsky that she played, and that was just that sealed it for me. So has nothing to do with anybody's origins. All right. Okay. And I don't think it's, yeah, has much to do, those social questions really, all right. Okay. Somebody asked Max Reger. So I don't know if you mean like um his orchestrations or study him as a composer or something, but I do include some Max Reger in the MOOC term one. Okay. And we may revisit his works because they are just so beautiful and so well written for the instrument, and and so illustrative of different things, different points that I like to touch on. All right. Ben Saylor asks, I am a huge fan of your series on Lily Boulanger. You've mentioned there is more to come, particularly an analysis of Faust et Hélène. Is that on the horizon? Yeah, it's on the distant horizon. Don't give up on me with that, okay? What's happened is that there was not a good copy of that around, and now they're being shared more and more. And I believe that same company, was it Internote? I think that they might be putting out their own version. So I'm just kind of sitting on my hands on that a little bit. Okay, but that would be, if I did that work, I would probably make it a major analysis, because I think that that's one of her greatest works. I mean, that and the piece D'un Soir Triste. That's like, that's almost bookends for her career of how great she was. So, but it's don't give up on me. I'll get to it. Callum says, I'm not sure I'd worry too much about the views. I noticed the group and materials are being included in the materials for orchestration courses at conservatoires in Europe and elsewhere. Yeah, I've noticed that too. Like, my professor sent me over and I have this question about XYZ. Or like, oh, I'll see a comment on some chat thread, just like, oh, we studied this video, and it'll be a link to my video. So, okay, that's fine. All right. Oh, it's Noxie says, thanks for everything. I'll be buying your new book. The previous two are fantastic. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. Thanks for the comment on chromatic runs. Heard a Brahms symphony on period instruments last Friday's Revelation. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just like, especially like him using natural horns, like as late as the late 19th century and so on. Yeah. I mean, it really does, in his hands, it makes a difference. I've heard some, natural horn versus valve horn kind of things where it doesn't make that much difference because of the context of the work. But other things, yeah, I mean, because of the way that, the specific kind of color that he's going for, it's very specific to him. I would say, like for Wagner, just using natural horns as much as he could in works that were just wildly chromatic. I mean, that stuff doesn't really make that much difference, I don't think. Sorry if that's sacrilege. Okay, PDQ Bach fan channel is back with another thing. Is it possible for woodwind auxiliaries to play higher/lower than their standard counterparts? Piccolo lower than flute? No, that's not possible. Bass clarinet higher than clarinet. It could squeak maybe, but then the clarinet could squeak higher, right? So yeah, they're not really built to do that usually. We'll say one thing that like, I just, I've dealt with so many players who are, enlisted to play bass oboe, but like if you get a specialist, like somebody who does Hollywood sessions all the time, they've got the most beautiful upper range, right? Just, anyway, I talk about it a little bit in this tip that I'm going to read, but I won't read that part so much. Maybe I'll refer to it. Okay, back on the analog synthesizer question. Thanks for the tips. Any scores you could recommend? The problem is that a lot of them are like contemporary, and so like the availability would just be zero, right? So I would say just like do a lot of. It's more of a listening thing, really, than it is like reading the score. So just go wild and do a lot of listening online of works that use synthesizers, analog, like that, where the um, where the orchestrator is using like ring modulation and LFOs and things like that. Saw waves versus square waves and so on. Yeah, so just I would just say it's more about listening. Just try to listen to a bunch of contemporary stuff. Um, am I going to have the audiation? I think Louise asks, are you going to have the audiology class again? Audiation class. So, all right. So here's the thing about that audiation class is I felt I went too far too fast with it. Okay. And I tend to do that a lot, you know. So apologies. I would like to return to it when I have a little bit more time and do like a starter course, like maybe on Mac Pro Video or something. And then like the step up to the more intense course. All right. Or maybe organize it slightly different than I did. But I do think that the kind of the cycle of training of audiation is really, really important, of improving the ear, of improving the musical memory of a work one has heard several times, and then score reading it and allowing the musical memory to speak through the bars, and also learning to not use musical memory, but just using association of the notes with one's inner ear to let them speak. And eventually the two become one, right? So if you just do it enough. So, I could just pick up a page of score. I don't have any within easy reach, but yeah, they're all just slightly out of reach. But, just looking at it and letting it speak to me. Um, you know, so yeah, I thank you very much for that question. I will be coming back to it. All right. Denise asks, I have a question. I'm writing a symphony in the style of Mozart right now. I don't really get how to use the lower strings and the viola efficiently and interestingly. Okay, so just score read, score read, score read. Okay. Yeah. So I would say study his later symphonies. Okay. That's really, anything from 37 forwards. And then also his operas, like his last two operas. And just really look at how he used the viola, because sometimes he scores the cello above the viola, right? He lets the musical lines go where they want to go. And God, I mean, what a loss it was that he died in his mid 30s. You know. Okay. Hugh mentions, I must know the PDQ Bach duet for tuba and bassoon. I think Zach and Rufus used to play that actually as part of their trio. They give their pianist a break and they play that. So yeah, there is repertoire for that trio. Okay, I'm going to take one more here. So just don't worry if I did not get to your questions. Wow, questions. I love them. So I'm just going to answer, I'll tell you what, two more questions, and then I'll get to the next announcement, okay? Quinn asks, I've gotten more into composition lately, but I want to start publishing. Do you have any specific tips when starting to publish your own music, either through a company or self-publishing? Well, I think I'm the wrong person to ask that question. I think there's some music publishing sites. I think a lot of people on music engraving might be doing self-publishing, music engraving tips on Facebook. I would say you'd get probably more advice than you want. Talking to a few people there who self-publish. I've done some self-publishing, but the thing is, like, at the stage that I am doing, it really is a situation where I'm working with people who are commissioning me to do something, and I get it ready and they do it and they take it wherever they're going to take it, whether it's to be published or whatever. I'm doing a ton of work for hire, in other words. And I'm doing my own publishing through an organization here that is an archive of New Zealand music. And I think that in the future, like I mean, I just don't have the time for it, and I don't really see the need for it in my career as it is right now where I am. But like maybe in a few years, I might want to start a relationship with a publishing company and so on. And I've got a lot of thoughts about it, but really would just take like hours to talk about it. So I think a lot of you'll get a lot more like bite-sized, morsel-sized bits of useful advice over at music engraving tips. And a lot of people there have worked for major publishing houses like Justin, who started it, used to work for Carl Fisher, right? So like check them out. They will know, they'll have the goods on that. Okay, Victor asks, in some early 20th century scores, there's horn or trumpet in E with written chromatics out of natural horn trumpet range. So there is no E trumpet. Why is it written so? Played a Yeah, I mean it's just a thing, people would just I think they'd move the slide to get the trumpet in E, or maybe they'd actually have a trumpet in E, or it was just like it was written. Probably more likely, I would say the more likely it's written for the idealized, trumpet in E or horn in E. The horn in E used to, and the trumpet in E used to exist as natural trumpets with crooks and so on and so forth. So you sort of get the outgrowth of that kind of thinking. But back in those days, it might have actually ended up being played on an F, or a B flat or something like that. So yeah. One more thing is it normal? Graphomaniac asks, is it normal that I think that open strings sound bad, and how common is it to avoid writing open string notes to avoid their sound? Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. That's just really a matter of personal taste. The thing about it is that it is the string player's job to make sure that everything sounds beautifully even, right? If they're not doing that job and the open strings are standing out, or if they are actually using the open strings to a certain effect and you don't like that effect, you're perfectly, it's your work. It's perfectly legitimate for them to say, can you stop that E instead of playing it open, right? And they'll probably say, oh yeah, sure, that's fine. That's no problem. I'll just shift this around and okay. But, I would say don't make it the end all be all of your style, right? Just listen to the players who play your work. So just like, how they interpret it. They may be throwing in a lot of open strings that you don't even realize, right? Or maybe you have got a fantastic ear and you can hear them all and they offend you personally. But whatever it is, I would say, trust to the string player the most. If they're getting a beautifully even sound all the way through, I wouldn't mess with it too much. Okay, so one more comment here. Peter observes, for film scores, the best use is no key at all. And the thing about it is that of course, in a film session, I wouldn't be writing a key signature in. But that. Thanks for the clarification, Peter. But of course, what I mean is that like actually writing, you could still write something in G flat, right? And just not use the key signature, right? But it might just sound like, if there's no real reason for it, other than the fact that you thought of it in G flat, then just leave it in G, right? Or F or something. Okay. Yeah. Oh, Ryan observes, sorry, I thought it was Alicia de la Rocha. No, that's, it was Peter Bradley Fulgoni. He dropped it on IMSLP. It's obviously influenced by Alicia de la Rocha, but it's got that, it has something more to it. I just felt that, it has this really beautiful orchestral sound, and, and it was one that I could use without, going through tons of permissions and worrying about record labels wanting needing a piece of the action and so on. All right. So now we're going to get to the next announcement. Okay. So what will I be really working on for the next, year or so? Okay, so timpani roll, please. Okay, and that is, hang on, this right here. Okay, so people have been waiting for this for a long time. Orchestration 105, the brass section. Okay, so there have been a few problems getting this off the ground, and here, I'll take away my face. And one of the problems was just finding the right kind of space to record in. And you might think, oh, well, I mean, you just look around a town like Wellington, you'll find something. It's harder than you think. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is COVID. I would book people in, and then we would go under another thing, another restriction, another blackout, and like nobody in the concert industry here, the concert music field here was mad at anybody for those restrictions of the necessity of having to do them, or few people were. But we were just shattered if canceling concerts, canceling recording sessions. Just, oh man, it was just so hard to get anything done. But now a lot of that is lifted. The situation seems to be under control. Knock on uh, aged spruce that's been varnished and sent down the river to be worked on by Cremonese violin makers. But yeah, so so finally I can get back to this. Okay, and so here's a sort of an outline. This is probably, a lot of this is going to change, but you can see, like, people who've taken the 101 and 102 courses on the string section and the wind section will see that it's organized really similar. So, like, there's a check-in, there's a discussion of the goals, like the materials, everything that people can use, how to access the stuff and so on. This is going to be probably on Mac Pro Video, if they'll still have me. And then there is, like, introduction, where do they come from, a rundown of each of the instruments. There'll be a quick touching on the most commonly used auxiliaries for these instruments, but discussion of their range, their timbre, and so on. And I am including band brass because a lot of the people who I interact with here in the Commonwealth, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, UK, and so on, and some other places that were more connected with the Commonwealth long ago, like South Africa and so on. There are people who are very interested in the British brass band. Okay, a lot of people score for them. Some people score for them professionally and so on. I am not a full-time British brass band kind of person. I think that the people who really devote themselves to it and have it down to a fine art are probably way better at it than me. However, I do want to touch on the instruments that are used for that, like euphonium and the E flat horn, quote unquote horn, and then of course the baritone and the two different tubas, the E flat and the B flat, and the cornets. So, like, putting the band brass in the course means that I can talk about the use of the cornet in concert music, like Debussy and Stravinsky and so on. And or for instance, like the use of the baritone horn in I think it was Mahler 7. So I can. So it's not a ghetto. I just want to include it. Okay. And then discussions of the the overall construction, tone production, the harmonic series, just the mechanics of it, the ergonomics, how are chromatic pitches achieved, with the mechanism. What's the strategy for articulation? A lot of people don't talk about voicing in orchestration courses, and it's such an important, something I was happy to include in the previous courses on winds. And then, articulation and so on. There's going to be more, like, this is not a full description of everything that's going to be included. And I may add a chapter or two, but this is just kind of the rough outline. Okay. Vibrato and non-vibrato. Very seldom do you see vibrato for brass instruments all that much in concert music, although, like, some people, like Maurice Andre, the trumpet player, used to use a ton of it like probably what we'd consider distasteful nowadays. For instance, playing the Telemann trumpet concerto in D, right? So most people would say, "Oh, that just like I can't listen to that. It's like a saxophone playing up there with all that vibrato and so on." So yeah, so I'll discuss those topics: mutes, horn stopping, maybe even a little bit of hand stopping on the um, on the trumpet, which gets used for an effect from time to time, special effects, and so on. Um, yeah, fingering, bore length variation. So I would talk a little bit about like piston tremolo and things like that. And yeah, so score positions, basic roles. Just like the layout in the orchestra, how you would look at it on the score, how you would see it on the stage. Transposing instruments, I talked about that in the winds course. I'll cover that too. The registers of the instruments and how they relate to each other, dynamic ranges and balance, brass as a choir. So these things really start to get into the more orchestration kind of thing. And then we'll be looking ahead to courses 106 and 107, which I want to do together possibly the next year. And so the approach that I have planned for those is to deal with the conical brass in the first course. So horns, tubas, and band instruments in the first course. And then in the second course, deal with cylindrical brass, trumpets, and trombones. All right. So in detail. So these would be the same way that I had really in detail, in-depth discussion in the courses 103 and 104 for the wind section. Right. All right. So I'm just going to quickly scroll down here, see if there are any observations, questions about that. How about a MOOC for brass and winds? Yeah. So it's all it's all coming in sequence. It's going to take some time though. All right. So look, so if that was just like that was just that observation, that announcement. So it's probably like when I come to the States, hopefully I'll be able to preview some of it. I don't think it'll be finished by then because these courses take a lot of time. And yeah, but I've got the right people to work with, some up and coming musicians, some musicians who have also been a part of the concert scene here, and just really fine players. There's one guy who is a specialist on alto trombone, and he's going to be playing a lot of that, a lot of things from works by Berlioz and Brahms and other musicians. That obviously the part, though it's played on tenor today, was really intended for an alto. So which altos are not as expensive as you might imagine. So yeah. All right. So so that was my little announcement about that course, and I'm real excited to get started working on it. And yeah, so anybody who is just joining up right now, just a quick announcement. If you've been thinking of getting the Orchestration Tips books, I've got a research sale going on right now. Both books are individually available for $25. You can get the bundle for $48. So there's a special end of the sale kind of announcement. So yeah, so if you can, it would really help me out. All of the proceeds are going towards research costs. I've got a research assistant who helps me out a lot on different things. Hopefully he still has time this year. And also, of course, I need to hire the players to work on that brass course. And yeah, so anyways, so thanks to everybody who has gotten a book over the past 2 months. It's really, really helpful. It's gonna make a huge difference. Alrighty, so let's get back to your questions on the Q&A. All right. Yeah. So Andrew observes piano recordings for the Orchestration Challenge were useful, but I also found it helpful to look up a couple of other performances for differences in interpretation. And I'll have a link to other people's interpretations. Yeah. So I think I might have had a link to the Alicia de la Rocha recording when we did the Faya, right? For instance, I would say, like, in terms of the Barvinsky, the greatest interpreter of that work right now is Violina Petruchenko. So, I don't see how you could get better than that. Although it's interesting to hear other performers, like a composer reached out to me and she shared her version of it, and it was also amazing. Really, really well done. So, I mean, there's an appreciation for Barvinsky in Ukraine that we're just unaware of here in the West. And I mean, I'm in the very far West here. But it's such yeah, it just was such a great piece. And yeah, so if you could find alternate versions of the Barvinsky, then yeah, then you might have heard hers already. Quinn asks, he mentions arranging Vivaldi's Four Seasons for British Brass Band, original pieces in E major, which makes it hard to play on E flat brass. Would it be a good idea to rewrite the piece in E flat major, and then provide both the original E major version and the transposed E flat version? Don't even bother with the E major version, is what I would say. I mean, you could keep it for yourself just for reference, but like, put it in E flat. I do everybody an enormous favor. Okay, and you won't be too far off. And I mean, that happens all the time in these kinds of arrangements. A piece will be just shifted up or down a pitch so that it'll or a tone or semitone, so that it fits right into the natural tuning of the instruments. And it's just so much easier on everybody. And in case you might think that's sacrilege, well, I have news for you that Beethoven was happy to take a work in E major that he wrote for a sonata that he wrote for piano and rearrange it for string quartet in F major. All right. So if Beethoven can do that to his own piano sonata, then I think you've got my blessing anyways to put your Four Seasons piece in E flat. All right. And I'm sure that the band director that you're working with will will observe it. And then somebody observes, Quinn, change the key. It's your arrangement and Vivaldi's not around to complain. Good point. All right. Somebody appreciated the Boulanger coverage. Thank you, David. Observation, Miriam, back to this topic of different pianists. Miriam makes the observation how different a piece can sound even just between two pianists. Help clarify what decisions I want to make when arranging. Absolutely, very valid. Yeah, and the piece that we're going to be studying is going to be something that most people probably will not have even thought of orchestrating, but there will be lots of versions of it out there for you to compare. Okay. Ryan asked, who's my best or most influential teacher? I think I've answered this before. Just go check out. I think it's on the Orchestration Online site, public for anybody to read. It's my Diary of an Orchestrator. I think it's something like Treasures in the Sand or something like that. It's when I took this trip to, it was the week that my harp concerto was premiered in LA, and I took a trip out to the desert to just see if the property out there was worth keeping in the family, because it was about to go under from, the taxes hadn't been paid in 10 years and stuff. And I'd had it deeded over to me, but the paperwork had gone wrong and stuff. So I just went out there to see if the situation was worth salvaging, and it kind of wasn't. It's kind of better to just let it kind of go back into the natural state that it was when my grandmother lived there. But yeah, my best and most influential teacher, the full description in that post, was a woman named Victoria Kramer, née Kramer, ended up with the name of Harris from her husband. And she was a concert pianist, and she was just hell on wheels. So, she was the first person that I met who was a hardcore professional artist. And, I think I can thank all of this. She deserves thanks for all of this that I am living in right now. For starting that, for lighting the fire. I think I would eventually stumbled on it, but she was the person who opened the door. That one back there. All right. Okay, PDQ Bach fan channel. Would you include a tip for contrabass clarinet in the next 100 orchestration tips? Okay, I'm taking a screen capture of that question. Yes, I will, because I have actually worked more and more with contrabass clarinet players. So yeah, I do have some definite tips, and there's some advice about it in, I think, 104, the Orchestration 104 course. My number one request is I would like to see more tips focused on choral writing and choral integration into orchestral textures. It's a forgotten section, in my opinion. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. There's going to be some stuff about voice in 100 last orchestration tips. Okay. So I don't know if that will assuage your hunger for more training on choral writing. But I do have some other things planned too, which may touch on that in a big way. Okay. Stay posted. All right. Changing the key for brass band arrangements done all the time. Observes Hugh. He would know, I think. It's very insightful about that resource. And yeah, it's good. It's thanks for chiming in on that, Hugh. My thoughts on whole beat metronome practice. Let's just focus on orchestration, I think, for this. Okay. Yeah, I could go on. As you can see, I keep gesturing the wrong direction. As you can see, I have one last piano student. That's my son. And yeah, and I've got, I could probably have a piano teaching online website with advice for piano teachers and so on and so forth, but that part of my life is just kind of over, except for this last very fun um I have to say really entertaining and satisfying student to teach. I'm not going to try to build him up to be some big genius or anything like that. He'll show you when he's ready, if he wants to show you that he's a genius. So, Bruckner, was he a good orchestrator in your opinion? Is there a possibility that you'll include his music in your video lessons in the future? I might include sections of it, Graphomaniac. So, remember how I was talking about that sort of thread of kind of like intellectual working out of problems and, kind of brotherhood or sisterhood or whatever between the musicians in the orchestras that was, Mozart to Haydn to Mozart to Beethoven to Mendelssohn and Schumann to Brahms to where did it go from there? As I mentioned, um, like some composers like Mahler picked that up and and integrated that sort of apotheosis of that and of massive orchestration. And I'd say Bruckner kind of is part of that as well, though some people would say that maybe things kind of go awry from time to time. So, I mean, I'm not really in this to sort of point out other people's orchestration mistakes or idiosyncrasies. You know, um, I'd rather kind of like focus on things that I notice right now that people are doing in their own scores that I can coach them on. And if I see a trend happening over and over and over again, like people marking, their single wind parts on a staff with two wind players as A1. I could jump in and say, don't do that. But yeah, but I would say for his own sake, there are some fantastic moments in his works that I would not mind making into like a masterclass kind of a video, like I was starting to do with Faya before I got sidetracked. Okay. What are the least written for instruments that you feel deserve composing for more often? Um, I would say like I'd like to see more stuff. Like if we're talking about auxiliaries, of course, I'd like to see more stuff written for the lupophone, the sort of the ultimate bass oboe family member. Yeah, but like in terms of like instruments that are not are not necessarily all that rare. I'd like to see more good flugelhorn writing. I'd like to see some more alto trombone stuff. That written in a more contemporary kind of a style. Now, contemporary, I don't mean any particular ism. You know, minimalism, maximalism, whatever ism. I I don't really pin myself down to any particular style personally, so why should I do that for anybody else? So when I say contemporary, I just mean things that are happening right now, not, contemporary, having to follow a certain kind of, like, say, very scholastic kind of idea, or very, maybe even commercial. Somebody might think, oh, that means commercial. So, um, but yeah, I'd like to see more of that myself. Yeah. And like, um, yeah, more bass clarinet stuff. It's always good for all my bass clarinet friends out there. Okay. What is my favorite James Horner score? Just really still has to be Aliens. I mean, that was why I was so stoked that I was able to review it. I think was it a year or two ago now. Yeah, just it is so much fun. I remember that, like, I mentioned it, and I had this blistering comment from somebody who talked about how, obviously, he was ripping off everything from this other composer, and how I could even dare and mention him without mentioning that other composer in the same breath, and blah blah blah. And it was like, dude, I'm just analyzing this orchestration. I'm not making any kind of judgment about it, or you know. Anyways, I love that movie. I actually just watched it a couple weeks ago, again with my son, who really likes that movie too. So, Aliens. Yeah. So it's just really, really fun. And when you consider, like, it was written under the most enormous pressure for a director and a producer who were completely unsympathetic of, how their recutting was just destroying this poor guy's life. So yeah. Anyway, that's another story. Okay. PDQ Bach fan, this is clarifying my previous question. I mean, compose a part in which the piccolo is scored lower than the flute. Okay, so it just depends on, like uh, if you're aware of the results of that cross voicing. I mean, things like that do happen from time to time. You just, like, if you want the quality of the piccolo to have that, like, say, in its lower register, to have kind of that sort of almost folk flute sort of a sound. And then you want the flutes to sort of play higher. I would say, like, when you do cross voicings like this, try to make the higher auxiliary that's scored lower more prominent in the balance, and perhaps the standard instrument should back off a little bit. Okay, or whichever is the higher instrument should back off a little bit. Otherwise, I just kind of see no reason for it. If you're going to score something that is essentially invisible, right? It makes no difference how you stack the flute family instruments, then don't even bother, because it's just, you end up with a part that's weaker. So, so it's just like, whichever instrument would um, would be hurt by that voice crossing in the balance of the parts, you have to sort of justify your reasons for wanting it lower or higher than the other instrument, right? So it's like so many other things, it depends, right? Okay. Okay. A suggestion by Andrew: check out video recordings of performances if you can't find the score. Hans Zimmer performed his Inception suite. Yeah, it's things like that. Yeah, there's like a lot of stuff around. Um, oh, somebody says your channel has been hugely helpful in learning and finding resources for orchestration. As a novice in the area, I thank you greatly. Exactly. This is why I do, like, getting people interested, taking it seriously, having access to resources, that is one of the big reasons why I do this. And there's, yeah, Adrian observes one can score high B flat clarinets or high bass clarinet higher than lower notes in a regular clarinet, but it would be a special effect. Exactly. Open strings can be fantastic depending on style. Yeah, I think if the entire piece is non vibrato, kind of like that Baroque style, then you know then it's then, like, open strings work really, really well. Okay. Simon Alami asks, what about a mook for brass and woodwinds? Yeah, yeah. So it's down the pike. All right. So I've got to go. It's supposed to be, so it's individual string instruments and small chamber, then string orchestra, then individual winds and chamber groups, and then orchestra with winds and strings, right? So it's like it's a progression of. All right. Metropolis entered public domain this year, which has a great film score. Yeah, so by Huppert's. Wow. Like, why that? It's like, why isn't that guy played all the time? It's such a great score. Um, Scores entered public domain this year or will enter next year that I am excited about. Yeah, there are one or two things. I probably shouldn't get into it too much right now because like I might give away something that I'm going to be analyzing soon. Okay, so just sit on that for a little while. All right, Andrew. Okay. All right. So a mention of NABA by Hugh. Uh, yeah. So so just check that out. NABBA. Yeah. So British brass bands becoming more popular in the USA. Yep. All right. So is there a real difference between portamento and glissando in the string section? Okay. So I talk about this I think in 100 orchestration tips. So think about glissando as being the act of sliding, right? It's the effect of sliding the right. So that it's just like that is like if we're just talking about completely technical observations about what these terms mean, right? So the glissando slide, that's what it means. That's what it is, right? So if I were talking about like whether it was like a piano or harp glissando, which obviously is over fixed pitches, or if I were talking about a string glissando or or winds or whatever, like kind of bending the pitch or whatever. So like those things I would definitely mention as glissando. However, portamento is a different thing, right? Portamento has the connotation of repositioning the hand, right? So you might think, well, that's exactly the same thing, isn't it? All right, you're just sliding up, and yes, it is. So that's why it's used. But then, like the connotation of sliding the hand up is that like you end up in a higher position, and then you can access those fingers, right, as opposed to over there, right? So, and furthermore, right, it is sometimes intended to mean connecting the pitches with a slide like right at the end, right? So you're going as opposed to you see what I mean? So that some people use that to differentiate what they mean between glissando and portamento. The problem is if you don't define your terms, who knows how they're going to play it, right? All right. What's the worst mistake an orchestrator can make? Go check out my video. I can't even remember. Is it something like top 10 orchestration mistakes or something like that? And then also talk out scoring errors, my 12 common scoring errors. Okay. Bach transposes piece when necessary. Peter observes. All right. Justin asks, if you have a key of 3 to 4 sharps, do you write with brass with flats to make it easier, or a key of several flats, transpose the strings to? Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. So, I would say don't mess with that. I would have tuba and trombones could play, pretty much any key. So they should be able to. Trumpet and C, and then the horns just play whatever. Right, they're only one flat off from C too, right? So don't worry about that so much. Okay. Do I have perfect pitch? Ryan Wilk asks. I don't know. The thing is, I've never really tested myself. Like somebody will play a note and I'll say, that I think that's an E. And somebody will say, oh yeah, that's an E. Sometimes I'll be totally wrong though, and they'll say, that's D. What are you talking about? And people who have perfect pitch, you play a note and they immediately know what it is. So I'm probably not. I might have lazy perfect pitch or something, or might have a relative pitch that remembers what pitch I heard a week ago, has held on to that information somewhere. And then I hear something relative to it. And it's like, yeah. So I think that like the perfect pitch course by David L. Burge is kind of, I don't think you can teach yourself perfect pitch, but I think, he may like he has this relative pitch course that's part of that. I think that he might saturate the students so much that they feel like they have perfect pitch. I don't know, but like I have never taken it. But yeah. Where are the Orchestration 102, 101, 102 courses available? Ask Quinn Anderson, Mac Pro Video. Just look under Orchestration at Mac Pro Video. It's all one word, MacProvideo. So I remembered how to spell video. Okay. All right. So I'm really getting behind on my announcements. Okay. So it's time for another announcement or another observation. Okay. And I'm just going to fix the screen. Okay. So I'm going to read you a chapter or half a chapter with some images from from I'm getting all these things confused in my head, from 100 last orchestration tips. Okay, so let me just okay, so here we go. So I'll read some of this and then I'll share I will share one of the images. In fact, why don't we just start off with this image that I'll be sharing. Okay, this image right here, as I'll mention in the tip, is from 100 More Orchestration Tips, and I'll explain what it is doing there in a minute. Okay, so this tip is called Woodwind Optimal Registers for Seamless Dovetailing Between Instruments of the Same Family. Okay, and all right, so here's the text of the tip, or the first half of the tip, and the rest of this will be shared in a couple of days on Patreon. Okay, so apologies to my Patreon supporters. It's a little late. It was something I had intended to share earlier, but just preparing for this event, a lot of things got delayed. So apologies. All right, so here comes the text. Sometimes a composer conceives of an exposed line that's so wide in scope that it requires dovetailing between instruments. And yet there may be a need to keep that changeover as seamless as possible. With strings, this is a fairly simple proposition, as most registers are nicely balanced to one another, and it's easy to move from basses to cellos, cellos to violas, or violas to violins without too great a disparity in timbre. It's not so easy in winds, where the different families have a wide variety of contrasting timbres and registers, and even two wind instruments of the same family may have only limited ranges in which truly seamless dovetailing can occur. I'll cover the problem of dovetailing between winds of different families in the next tip in the book. This will be the next chapter. But let's focus on the second problem first. Optimal registers for seamless dovetailing between instruments of the same family. And by seamless, I mean a handover between the two players, that a handover between the two players sounds like the whole line is being played by a single instrument. In 100 More Orchestration Tips, chapter 14, that's where this image comes from, I discussed the problem of piccolo to flute unisons, how the middle register of the piccolo and the middle of the flute's high register share the most compatible balance. Lower than sounding C6, the flute starts to dominate the further down the range goes. Above G6, the piccolo comes into its own with a lot of power and assurance, while the flute gradually gains a more stressed, forced character up to its top, a D7, which you can, let's see if I can get here we go. So you can see, and right here, this is just the shared range between the two instruments, right? Starting from the piccolo's lowest D going to the flute's highest D. So it's not the complete range of both instruments, right? But just where they meet in the middle between their ranges and what would be the ideal unison pitches. Just as those middle pitches are ideal for unison doubling, they're also perfect for seamless dovetailing. Supposing that a line started lower on the standard flute, rose through its registers, ultimately finishing a note or two too high in its range. So, like, say, went up to E or F or G or something. Dovetailing over to piccolo will be the only way to achieve the full range of notes, and this will also give the line a better dynamic control across its entire scope, especially in allowing for a gentler ending on higher pitches. So, for instance, if you went up to E or F, your piccolo player could, it'd still be a very resonant note, but the piccolo player could still bring it down a little bit, where obviously, this range is just very forceful on high flute. All right, so You might ask, what about the lower flutes? All right. All right. A perfect handover point is not quite so cut and dried between the lower flutes and the standard flute. Part of this has to do with the natural tendencies of alto and bass flute scoring to focus on the lower register. Both instruments will have an exaggerated breathy quality in their low registers and then gain a cooler, grainier, folk-like sound above written C. These higher registers are so different in character from standard flute over the same notes at pitch that seamless dovetailing is usually not an option. So I'm talking about like dovetailing right up here in, this sort of area where, as you can see in the chart, the notes are getting kind of, just very folk-like in their sound, whereas the concert flute, really sounds like a concert flute up here, just very direct and so on. And yet I've scored very direct, forceful upper register alto flute lines that aren't too different in character from middle register standard flute. So that would be in my piece Matins. I have a piece for harp and alto flute called Matins, and it goes the entire range of the alto flute all the way up to its top C. If I were forced to figure out a near seamless dovetailing between the two instruments in these registers, I might be able to make it work, but I'd still have concerns. And dovetailing from upper register bass flute to middle register standard flute would probably be even more problematic. So I'd probably recommend a more dependable handover point from written B4 to G5 of both instruments to the standard flute. So as you can see, those are different pitches on either instrument. So, written B4 to G5 on the alto flute is sounding F sharp to D. Right. So I would say this would be where you could hand off, especially like here, like G, A, and B. And, the standard flute could take over on these pitches and you wouldn't really hear the seam so much or that much. And I mentioned in the tip, the velvety quality of all the instruments provides a bridge which helps to cover up any pronounced differences. And here, bass flute, I would say would be, you would really want to stay in the bottom sixth of the flute's range when trading off to bass flute. So, E, F, and G, you could probably get a seamless dovetailing trading off of the line to the neck to the flute going downwards as well. These don't just have to go up, right? The flute could be descending from a high pitch and then trading off to bass flute, down here lower when it gets very, very velvety and so on. All right. Comparing the quality of timbre between oboe and English horn, one might assume that any lower pitch might sound similar enough to switch imperceptibly between instruments, but that's not quite right. The very lowest notes of the oboe can have quite a pronounced character and lack the subtlety and range of control that the English horn possesses on these same sounding pitches, which, really good players can dovetail seamlessly in this area. But, I would say just like try to find an average of, like try to go with the safest option. I would say I would dovetail right in here. I'll talk about that. Then in reverse, as the English horn starts to rise above the treble staff, its peculiar thinness is quite unlike the oboe's generous warmth and command of expression on parallel pitches. So on the same sounding pitches, the oboe is a lot warmer and So the optimum register for seamless dovetailing rests between the sounding pitches of D4 to A4, perhaps even going up to C4. As you can see in this example here, these are written pitches of A4 and D4 on the English horn. So, so like starting from here, I've got an example of English horn starting on this A. So that's what this would be transposing. With the possible extension upwards as high as here we have like written E, sounding A for the English horn. It could go possibly all the way up to this G up here, right? So But I'd avoid dovetailing on these higher pitches in subtler, very exposed scoring. But if you have a line that bubbles merrily along, like a lot of oboe solos can, or soars with more power, then probably going all the way up to here is probably fine. Yeah. And then here I've got a an excerpt from Tane and the Kiwi, which you can go to Radio New Zealand website, rnz.co.nz. Anyways, you can go to the Radio New Zealand website and just like access this and listen to the whole piece. But here's an example of English horn dovetailing into a first oboe solo, and it's really imperceptible. Like when the players are really paying attention. I mean, actually, I don't know if they always are. I've never heard any orchestra not do this right. Any players not do this right. So it just works perfectly, and you can see there really are. It's the same basic line just being moved up to a new level and so on. Um, you know, some differences in the relationships of the intervals and so on in the melodic curve, but yeah, so this point right here, this transition is what I would call beautifully seamless. And anywhere from D up, there's way more control just naturally on the oboe. All right, so that is just a little taste of 100 orchestration tips, and it probably something that you'll notice about it is that there's a lot about the first edition of 100 orchestration tips that was just really blunt and short and sweet. Like a lot of the text for a lot of them was like 1,000 words or less, and or like 500 words or less. And when I went back and I did the second edition, I realized I just really had not said enough about anything, and so a lot of it was like adding insights and also like some caveats that some people had pointed out. Like a lot of times I would consult with one person or another orchestra player might have suggested a tip and so on, and then like later on they'd come back and say, I forgot to say this other thing about it, and then I'd say, oh geez, if I just put that in the book. That's why there was a second edition of orchestration, 100 orchestration tips. But the second book, longer, more intense, really going into detail, just because of like so many times when people would say, well, what about, so I would just really take more time on each tip and just really do a lot of checking. So that's kind of what takes more time. Okay, so let's get back to your Q&A. Adrian Holmes observes or comments, wrote a piece including high register bass oboe and high contra bassoon for an otherworldly sound. Any good alternative for the bass oboe? I see cor anglais seems too lyrical. Well, I mean, like, I don't know, maybe tenor sax or something, some people observed in my bass oboe video that there was almost a sax-like sound. So if you were to like have a real concert saxophone player, like play a tenor, you might get a similar sound, like in the higher register, just as long as they didn't like really kind of honk up there, just like really played smoothly and cleanly, without too much vibrato, or just like, okay, too much vibrato. I should rephrase that. So using the same kind of variation of speed of vibrato that the oboe players do. Like you'll hear that in some concert players. Like they'll have a very oboe-like approach with the sort of medium fast and slow kind of vibratos. So, I mean, it just depends on what you're trying to write up there. Okay. Yeah, so Pater says Aliens is Jerry Goldsmith. Andrew says Alien is Goldsmith. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, sorry. Just like, I'd love to do the Alien score. I got it for Christmas. Yeah, because I've not reviewed Goldsmith yet. What piece will you do for the next score analysis? I would love to see Daphnis and Chloe. I mean, yeah. Okay, I would love to do it too. I just got done analyzing a 1-hour piece with the with the Symphonie Fantastique, so I need to do something shorter in between. Okay, all right. Richie asked, "Do I think the contraforte will replace the contrabassoon at some place as the de facto low woodwind auxiliary, or simply fade into obscurity?" Neither. Okay, I think the contrabassoons are going to continue to be used for the next century. I think that the contraforte is going to stick around because it's so damn useful. I could see it being used more in like shows, crossover concerts, modern works, and so on, and just gradually phasing in without phasing out the contrabassoon. Okay, it's really up to the contra players, right, what they prefer. One of the observations that I'll make is like, even with really experienced composers, I'm noticing a kind of a little bit of an automatic reaction against the contraforte for being too loud, right? But here's the thing: is the contraforte isn't too loud unless you play it too loud. And what's the first reaction of a contrabassoon player picking up the contraforte and getting excited about it? Is playing as loudly as they wish they could have played on certain things, like, also Sprach's Zarathustra, and it's like, wow, I've got the power to do this now. And then they put a video on YouTube, and everybody thinks, oh, that instrument's just too loud. But I worked with a guy who played contraforte on my last big concert with New Zealand Symphony Orchestra. He had the instrument for several years and had played it in and out and constantly and all over the place. And he had just the most beautiful pianissimo, and his control and proportions of dynamics were so much clearer, and yet he could meld right into the texture, and not stick out. I mean, don't write it off if you don't like it at this point. Just think of the possibilities with a really good player who is doing the right thing with the dynamics. But having said that, like, the main thing that people are going to have a problem with is like it's got like saxophone like tone holes, like it's got really big tone holes compared to the contrabassoon, and that's one of the things that gives it more power. All right. Could I shout out any highlights from the Barvinsky challenge with over 100? There's this really awesome composer named Callum who had a massively amazing entry. Like I would say, you can't really take length or participation on Patreon or not, just like being a website subscriber, as being any indication of one score being more noteworthy than another. Because like I had I've had some top pro orchestrators participate just as website subscribers, and I've had people who are just total beginners, submit at the highest level. So I can't really, say that one level or another, or one person stood out or another. I think, maybe just go through. I would say just go to Facebook and go through the featured posts and just like observe what I said about different works. And I think that the inferences of the way that I talked about the different pieces, the different efforts, will probably, point the way toward what you should or shouldn't study if you have limited time, or if you're going for a particular kind of a thing. Differences between B flat and C trumpets. Big band, jazz, theater music, C trumpets almost non-existent. Any opinion about why they're more common in concert music versus these? It just is really the sound, like for band and jazz and so on. You want that kind of bigger, more generous sound. And for concert music and a lot of pieces, you want like that really kind of high, clear, direct sound, like that. In some ways, that C trumpet is a little bit like the D trumpet, it has that really kind of that beautiful high register that is just, it's like a bright light shining, so yeah, it just really is the quality of timbre, I think, in all the registers. Like the low register of the B flat is just so amazingly intense, like if I were really going to score something with a lot of low trumpets, I would probably want them to be B flats. And if I wanted that kind of nice, clean, clear sound, I would probably favor the C. And I'd say that is a feature of my scoring just in general. and I've scored a lot of C in crossover scores with nary a complaint from the orchestra. They didn't like the scoring; they just they just use their B flats, and I don't really worry about it, right? So I picked the trumpet that acoustically fits the sound picture, and sometimes the key signature, right? So, um, all right. Ryan Beard Music says, I think a portamento literally as a bridge between between two notes, a last minute slide up or down. Yes, like that is like a lot of the perception of it. A gliss would last for the duration of the note, right? Right. So, once again, repositioning of the hand, right? Here's this note, there's that note, right? Whereas gliss, I'm going to slide over here. Oh, I'm thinking of In Excess song lyrics. Okay, somebody observes some people have piano pitch where they know the pitch if it's played on piano, but not in general. Maybe I have orchestra pitch, whatever. Keys aren't super important for brass unless you have trills, tremolos, which may or may not have weird valvings. And so Andrew mentions, yeah, I might mention that in the course. All right. Do brass prefer to see double flats, sharps when enharmonically necessary? Would they prefer easier enharmonic spellings? So, all right. So, like, and Ryan says, easier always, rarely reason to use double. So here I would part a little bit with Ryan, and just to say, like, whatever you score, it should make harmonic sense to the whatever the line of the music is, right? So if that ends up being the occasional double flat or double sharp or something like that, you trust to concert players. They've got tons of work in the repertoire where that occurs. But what I would say is, if you end up having music that's really sharp heavy with a lot of double sharps, or really flat heavy with a lot of double flats, you're obviously scoring in the wrong key for that instrument, right? Just take it to the enharmonic key. All right, that would be my, just even if it's just for the passage, so that it makes more sense. But yeah, just I would say, make the line harmonically consistent throughout, avoid going overboard. Okay, possible tip suggestion by PDQ Bach fan channel. Possible tip: should an orchestrator be concerned over which model, French horn, single horn, double horn? No, leave it to the player. It's just like tuba, right? You don't tell a tuba player which tuba to bring, right? They'll work it out, yeah. Yeah, and somebody says, I'd say the horn player figures all that out. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's just, they just will, Okay, what was the auxiliary woodwind named? An argument against Brett? No, not at all. No. It is not an argument against Brett at all. Okay, it is just my thoughts on it, right? Because he's not the only person coming up with different names for auxiliaries, right? So it's just and my observation wasn't so much about the benefits of renaming instruments one or the other, so much as it was about like an observation of the function of the instrument, and also dealing with orchestra management. Okay, so the realities of the situation are, if you call an instrument tenor flute, you immediately cause a big, and there's no other connotations, no other information, no qualifying kind of stuff for your client. You may end up with the orchestra librarian going into a tizzy because they have no idea who to give the part to, or whether the flutist is going to know, and a lot of flutists won't know, right? So, yeah, and I mean, I've seen some comments sort of like kind of explaining to professionals who had, professional flutists who are recording scores at the highest level in the industry, in the film industry, like having them explained to you by somebody who had sort of seized onto this new renaming and saying, well, of course, this is the name of that, and that is, and that they're, the pro is sort of saying, look, I don't know what you're talking about, So I would say, just like, it's not an argument against Brett at all. Brett is a friend of mine. I love that guy. Okay, and his contribution through his bandistration website and his books on that are just phenomenal. I would be the last person in the world to critique Brett. Okay, but it's just like the renaming thing. It's a caution. There's a cautionary about, like, you have to be clear about the instrument you're talking about. And I differ because of what I perceived about the functions of the instruments in terms of their naming, but it wasn't an attack or an argument at all. Okay. Can you recommend an atonal piece that's relatively listenable and helpful for composing? Sure. Farben by Schoenberg, the middle movement of his 5 pieces for orchestra. And I have, just go look up colors, or just look up 5 pieces for orchestra on my channel. Okay. And not only do I have an analysis of it, but I also have a sort of a color interpretation, just like I have the piano score, and I mark all the different instruments playing all the different pitches by different colors. So I don't know if that will match up to your idea of what the associating the color with the quality of timbre or so on. But I've seen that that's been shared. People were talking about resources that are shared in university courses. I think that's one that people are using a lot. Okay. Yeah, Takemitsu wrote some beautiful atonal symphonic music. I'm trying to remember. He had, like, was it birds descending into a pentagonal garden or something like that? It's like, I probably have totally said the wrong, but that made a huge impression on me. Yeah, I mean, that would be another one that I would say. And there are a lot of film scores that, frankly, are atonal, joyfully so, and they are accepted by the listener because they fit the picture. And something that a lot of people wouldn't accept in the concert hall, where they're expecting a different kind of music, don't realize that they accept it just beautifully, as but then again, there are some people who just they want everything to be tonal. And I don't have a dog in that fight. I love every kind of music. All right, spam. Should I accept a question from spam? Oh yeah, so Anna observes that the Berg Violin Concerto is an accessible or listenable, let's say, work, and I think that's also public domain too. So you can, I think it's on IMSLP. If I'm wrong, don't come after me. What are my thoughts on super low flutes, like you mean like sub contrabass and contrabass flutes and so on? Here's the thing: is that there are so many demos of those flutes where on YouTube where the players just do nothing but play percussively. They just they go pop, 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 and it's like, okay, that's great, but can you just maintain a nice, long, beautiful, and high and low? It's hard to find players like that. But then when you do hear them, it's just gorgeous. So that's the kind of scoring that I would like, but I know that it takes an enormous amount of breath. Why would you even use one? I would say I would use a super low flute if I were commissioned by a flute ensemble where they have contrabass and sub-contrabass flutes. You betcha. But would I score for one in a orchestral situation? If I were commissioned to do so, I would do so, and I would do so without hesitation. But but in terms of like my personal choice as an orchestrator, I really haven't felt the itch to do that. But I will say that I'm sketching very slowly alongside my piano concerto. I'm sketching a cello concerto, and that would have bass flute in it. And I'm just thinking of a couple of really haunting places to put it in. But I mean, everybody just writes haunting low flutes, don't they? That's like their purpose. Like, you almost never hear like a low flute part written just to be like kind of ordinary. So yeah. Okay. So Callum says, I've watched all of them. I have my own favorites, interested in whether we agreed. Maybe that would be something we could take up in a personal conversation. Okay. Thank you for making these videos. Familiar with Italian music around the 60s and 70s. Curious what I have to learn to do some of the arrangements. I have examples. Hey, just PM me. Let's get in touch. If you're on Facebook, or just join the Facebook group and just PM me, okay, and we can chat about it. Or if you're a Patreon supporter and I'm just not associating the name with the support, then send me a message. All right. Okay. Yeah. So somebody observes, is Berg's violin concerto exactly atonal? I mean, it has elements of, yeah. So yeah. I mean, Berg had this romantic side, right? Like, all right. Okay, besides ease of separation, why do you color each section of the orchestra with a specific color, purple for strings, green for woodwinds, etc.? Okay, it really has to do with a couple of things. Okay, so all right, I mean, you could think of like associations, like there's a kind of association of the purple being kind of a royal color, and the strings really being kind of like the royalty of the orchestra, in a sense of just like kind of constantly being there, defining what, if you take them out, it becomes a wind band, right? So like they really define what an orchestra is. And in so many works before the 19th century, they were like the most important thing in the orchestra. So so there's that, that's part of why they're purple. And the other part is because it looks so gorgeous when you have that color, that beautiful kind of glowing wood of a string instrument up against that background, right? So it's an aesthetic as well as just it's just a throwaway association. And then green is for woodwinds because of, they come from growing living wood, right? Which is sort of like the green tree. And then also, the darker instruments, or the silvery instruments, or darker instruments looking really beautiful against that green backdrop that I used in the 101, or sorry, the 102 to 104 courses. And I did a lot of tests of filming brass against different colored backgrounds, and I found that red was the one that sort of brought out the color of the instrument, and so that's why I use red. And then what's left is blue for the percussion, and that also has a kind of a cool look to it. And then of course like gold for harps and so on. I mean, some of it is a little it's a little suspect. Gray for the for keyboards. If I ever get to that course, I really want to do one on strings. So excuse me, harp and keyboard instruments. So that would be like keyboard instruments would be like organ, harpsichord, piano, celesta. Right. I don't know. Maybe I should put celesta in the percussion instruments, but I think it belongs in the, because it's like all of this really is about who is playing what, right? So who is the player is handling all these things. If you're an orchestral pianist at a top orchestra, you better be able to play music for percussion, for strings, percussion, and celesta. You better be able to play the celesta part for that. You better be able to play the piano and all that, the great Russian and American scoring and so on. So yeah, so so it's about the player really. So and their perspective, which I try to. So I'd rather have them all in the same place. All right. Okay. Low bass flute under high cello. That's a combination I'd love to hear. Thank you. Yeah, like imagine low bass flute with cello playing like a melody in natural and artificial harmonics. Okay, what do I think about Respighi's orchestration and music? You'll hear about that soon. Gray equals white plus black. Yeah, exactly. So that's the color that I use in the also is gray for keyboard instruments. So yeah, so we're kind of getting towards the end of the Q&A here. I'm not seeing a fresh bunch of new questions, so I'm going to announce my very last thing. Okay, and this is going to be something that I'm going to share um, I'm going to share for with the community at large, but as a sort of a course and a project in development, it will be mostly like archived as a Patreon thing. So like the juicy bits will be the juicy bits will be on the channel, and and like the detailed, more intense and more course like aspects will be on Patreon. All right, and I'll have more like once it starts in about a month or so, I'll have more information about it then. But it's this, okay, and that is I'm going to be offering a kind of a sort of a course on understanding slash updating Rimsky-Korsakov's principles of orchestration, because I feel like I've heard so many things, so many comments. I think even on the book itself, as it's published by Dover, there are film composers who swear by it, right? Okay, well, fine, but like there are so many things about it that are like not up to date. So I'm going to be offering a slash a course annotation kind of a thing on updating the principles of orchestration. And that is not to say me being as smart or as great an orchestrator in any way as Rimsky-Korsakov, but it's more my observations as a pro orchestrator on what it is about Rimsky-Korsakov's principles that really, really work great still today, and what things, kind of like everybody has a reinterpretation or a new way of dealing with it. So, for instance, like we're looking at this, his advice here, Table B, wind groups, right? And, he characterizes the lowest notes of the piccolo as weak and whistling. So I don't know of any professional piccolo players who would sound weak down, or would sound whistling down there. I think that they would have a beautiful, elegant sound, right? And then here he's got notes up here which he says are hardly possible, which are very easy to play for a lot of flute players and so on. Unusual high notes for the English horn. I mean, most players I know can easily reach a high G, and so there that would be one small example of ways that one could, just by a few observations, kind of update our information. Now, I'm aware that like for a while there was a site where some composers and writers had sort of given their own thoughts about the principles, and had done a really great job, right? So that's their thing. I'm not attempting to imitate that. This is an idea that I have had for before, for a long, long time, for about 20 years. So it's just kind of like a way of making Rimsky-Korsakov's information more usable to today's orchestrators. So that is going to be something kind of running as a kind of almost like an open book over on Patreon, and like some of the juicy bits, as I said, shared in the community as much as possible. All right, and that'll be some of the kind of short, sweet, powerful advice that I hope to share in kind of briefer videos that give me more time to work on the 105 course. But I also hope to share bits of that on Instagram, and link that, of course, to some of the social media that I'm already doing, and of course having longer excerpts of the 105 course in Patreon as well. So yeah, so that's kind of those are all my announcements. And people are already asking questions about that. So I'll just leave the screen up for a bit. There's already a question about it. How many of Rimsky-Korsakov's descriptions are because instrumentalists nowadays have had 100 plus years to practice and advance the techniques, not to mention the quality of the instruments themselves? I mean, there's a question of whether or not the quality of the instruments perhaps in Russia of that time might have been, resulted in a weak or whistling sound for the piccolo. Also, a question of whether or not Rimsky-Korsakov was being maybe a little overly poetic, and it terms, in a way to convey timbral information in text, right? Um, and there's, but like if you look at the level of scoring in, you know, in his own writing, and in, that of everybody else in Europe of that time, and in the Americas, as that concert music scene was developing, and other places in the world. Obviously, piccolos were doing quite fine in their middle register. High notes were being scored for oboes and English horns and so on without any, without being all that unusual. And yeah, I mean, so that, so yeah, I think it's, it really, like, a lot of Rimsky-Korsakov's, um, what we would call sort of maybe idiosyncrasies or whatever, are really have a lot to do with his perspective, right? And when you see the advances that Stravinsky made in his own works, obviously, Rimsky-Korsakov's perspective was not considered to be like a hard and fast rule that, if you disobeyed, like, it would be an anathema, at least for Stravinsky. Some people um, who went afoul a little bit of Rimsky-Korsakov did not get off so easily. He could be, I think he could be very political and very petty at times. And that's all been documented in biographies of Stravinsky and of Rimsky-Korsakov as well. But then on the other side, like, he could be incredibly generous. Like, his tutorship of Stravinsky is just amazing. Like, he saw Stravinsky was going to be like the next great orchestral composer to come out of Russia, possibly the greatest composer of the coming century, and he wanted to be the person who helped him get there. So, I mean, there's like so many characters of that time, of that era. He had these wonderful quirks, and that, I think, that comes out in his writing. It's all very methodical. He's like, if you orchestrate according to his principles, I mean, you can't go wrong, but you may not get out of his, of his sound, right? So, um, so there are, yeah, I mean, like, to kind of go forward, there are lots of bits of advice. Hang on, this is taking a while to, we just would, like, the low part of the glockenspiel being ill sounding, right? Confused sounds on. I mean, I think he's talking more of, like, does that is the timbre clear, right? And lower notes of the xylophone and so on. And here he says that the celesta's first octave is very good, and that's something that I don't quite agree with. I think it's kind of thunky sounding, even in really good modern celestas. So I think just kind of having a little bit of counterpoint to some of his advice, I think, would just be really useful, and maybe eventually, this could be released as a book, an annotated principles. So, I have, yeah. Somebody says, "Can we thank Rimsky-Korsakov for this information?" Though, of course, of course. There is nothing about this. This would be a testament to his achievement. This would not be a correction of his mistakes, but it would be an updating, right? Just as I would hope that, somebody might come along in 100 years, or maybe after I'm gone and no longer able to do it, would update my own efforts, if they're still useful. I don't know. Somebody says, Pater asks, aren't the unplayable ranges of Rimsky-Korsakov actually difficult also nowadays for the average amateur? Yes, they are. It is a good point, and that is something I won't fail to mention. Thanks for bringing that up. Okay, somebody mentions they have to run. Could I repeat the first announcements? Yeah. Okay. So let me go over everything, because I think I'm going to sign off too. Like, everybody has just been so nice, has been giving me a great, great questions, some things that I could possibly use as further tips or courses, or and you've just been so kind and so supportive and everything else. So I'm going to go over the announcements again for Alvaro and anybody else who came in late to this. So first announcement, just to kind of repeat what I was just talking about, the Rimsky-Korsakov's principles. I'm going to be doing a sort of an open book annotated version over on Patreon, and and sharing some of that with the group. I read a chapter of 100 Last Orchestration Tips, and let's stick with that for a minute. Okay, 100 Last Orchestration Tips, and that is a book which I'm currently raising funds for the research on. With the sale price of the book is now down to $25 on this last day of the sale. I don't usually do that, but I just thought I would throw that in just to try to be helpful to everybody. So, very cheap price, probably it's cheaper than I've ever offered it, but I just really want people to have access to the information, and, it will help me if people are able to buy it and improve themselves. So let's go back to this. And then the other big announcement was that I am starting to work on Orchestration 105, the brass section, which will be just like 101 and 102, the string section and the wind section, both on Mac Pro Video. And, it will detail the overall generalities and scoring and unity and also individuality of the different instruments and the whole section, right? And then I hope to follow that with two more courses, one dealing with the conical brass, which would be like horns, tubas, and brass band instruments in far greater detail, and talking about all of their auxiliaries that are useful to mention. And then a further course with the cylindrical brass, the trumpets and trombones. Okay, so so that was my little event, and I hope that was a nice enough jolt of information and announcements to come, and just to once again express my appreciation for this community. It's just it just really has changed my life to be able to communicate with everybody and share resources and hear what you guys have got to say, and watch people develop as orchestrators, or have people come in and share their orchestrations that are as good as anything I'll ever do, or better. So it's just really a revelation to me, and something that I appreciate every day. And the fact that I'm getting a little bit of support on Patreon, and that is also we're the people who have the most uncertain kind of financial situations. The fact that people are able to chip in to help me help everybody else on the internet, that is just a daily miracle. So thank you guys very, very much. So stand by for me starting to drop things on Instagram. Check out Orchestration Online on Instagram if you want to get it direct, but I'll also be sharing that on Facebook and Twitter occasionally, and definitely on Patreon with much more detail. I'll be sharing chapters as they start to arise from Rimsky-Korsakov Updated, and I'll also be dropping more videos, more orchestration analysis videos. The last chapter of the Berlioz is coming soon, and then we will have kind of more focused, shorter videos for a while I work on all of these other things, including 100 Last Orchestration Tips. And just once again, last is not the end of the tips. It's not the end of my writings. It's just the last book to be formatted the same as 100 Orchestration Tips. And then after that, the way that I present them may change. And I may actually, before I do that, there are a couple of other books I want to write. I still haven't written my book on texture, balance, and function. And I still haven't written a couple other things I probably shouldn't mention before I am in a better frame of mind, or better suited to take them on. So thanks everybody so much for your patience. I know people have just been waiting for this brass section course for so long, and there's some really fine players who have agreed to step in. The trombonist and the trumpet player in particular are top notch, and I've got my eye on this one horn player who's just out of this world. And hopefully I can keep it here in New Zealand and work with players here who are phenomenal. We've got world-class players here who are just have the most beautiful sound, and who come from different cultures, and bring it all together. And that's, I think, what makes New Zealand Symphony Orchestra Wellington, which I work with very closely, and Auckland Philharmonia and Christchurch Symphony Orchestra. Just all of those orchestras have such a beautiful sound, and I feel, I'm not going to say it's individual to New Zealand in a way, but it is something that represents a culmination of people coming from all over the world, coming here and sharing their music, and I'm part of that too. I don't know if I'm as good as them as an orchestrator as they are as players, but yeah. So I hope to share that with you and continue that tradition. And thanks everybody for joining me. And some people are dropping in some questions. It's too late. Which inversion is your favorite for a trombone chord? Definitely, I would say like a 6/4 chord. That's really, really fun. Yeah, and then seventh chords like anyways, I shouldn't get into it. So anyways, and I see my friend Sherry has jumped in, another great New Zealand musician and creator. So anyways, so that is all I had to say for today. And I'm starting to run out of voice, and I have to teach my son some more piano today. So I better save it for that. So thanks everybody. You guys are beautiful. Keep your creations, your orchestrations going. And I really look forward to seeing your reactions, your comments, your feedback for me on the things that I'm going to be doing this year. And if you are going to participate in this year's orchestration challenge, I also have something really, really fun planned for that too. All right. See you all soon. Thank you so much for being here.